Now you can see that I have turned my painting sideways. I encourage you to turn your painting if necessary to accommodate your hand and what makes it easier for you to add the strokes of fur. I'm using the 276 Buff NuPastel Sharp Edge to continue adding the fur on the side of Oscar's face. I'm carefully drawing it out, taking my time, putting in the fur. I've switched to the 299 gray pastel. I felt it would be a better choice here than the white or the buff. It's not quite as bright as either one of those colors, so that makes a nice transition as we work around Oscar's face. Now I'm going to speed things up a little bit, continuing to use the blue to add that background back into the fur. So we can get that right up next to Oscar and make a nice transition. I think this is my very favorite pastel surface. Velour makes the best animals, the softest animals. I'm using the gray 299. Continuing to add fur to Oscar's face. Now I'm using my white 211 NuPastel to add brighter hairs, the white hairs, on Oscar's muzzle. So I lightly apply those over the gray hairs that we put down before. As long as you're using light pressure when you apply your pastels, you can add many layers on top. So I'm able to add these brighter white layers right on top of the gray ones. Look how that brightens his face up. Love that. Add a few underneath his eyes as well. Use it, rotate it, get a sharp edge. When I've run out of sharp edges, then I go to my sanding block and sharpen the stick. Now I'm using the 299 light gray, adding the hairs underneath his neck. I've switched back to the white, adding a few more white hairs on his muzzle. Now I've turned Oscar right side up, and now I can make some further adjustments. So I'm using the 31 Conte pencil to add some darks, and I'm back to using my white NuPastel. Drawing some longer hairs out from the edges. This is a 305 Spruce Blue. Coloring that background in right up close to the dog. And this is my black NuPastel. I'm using the sharp end to draw a few sharp black hairs down under the nose. Darkening the top of the nose. And pulling up a few black hairs. Darkening the mouth with the tip. And the little corner of his mouth. I'm using the point of my white NuPastel to pull down some white hairs. It was easier to get into a small space with the tip than use the edge to get that short a hair. Now I'm going to use my 6B charcoal pencil to pull the black hairs from the nose in case I overlap the nose with any white hairs from previous applications of my pastel stick. I'm adjusting the highlight on the lip. Now I'm coloring in that little highlight. I'm adding a little bit of blue over it with our number 29 Conte pencil. Shade it just ever so slightly. I like that. It turned out well. And now using my white charcoal pencil to add little tiny white hairs. Little tiny highlight on that lip. These are little adjustments that make all the difference in your painting. So take your time. You can see my tip broke. There's a few little white spots on Oscar's nose, but we can blow those away. Here comes my blower. I'm going to blow away those little pieces. Now I'm adding some more color to the background. .305 Spruce Blue. And drawing hairs out with my white charcoal pencil. Oscar's really starting to look handsome now. I'm continuing to build a few dark areas with the 353 Cordovan in the nose. It didn't look quite dark enough to me. So when I paint, I'm constantly evaluating my values to see if things to me need to be darker or lighter, and then using my pastels accordingly. So I've speeded things up a little bit. I'm adding Cordovan under Oscar's chin, the hair that's below, to bring those, to make those values darker. So I've decided to switch to my 411 3 burnt umber to add the darker color. And I'm adding a little more 411 5 to make him a little bit redder. So now I'm using the 299 light gray to add the hairs under the chin. These hairs are much longer than the hairs on Oscar's face. Now I'm using the 253 Cocoa Brown to blend in the very top edges of the lighter color I previously added to make it more blended. Now I'm adding white on top of the light gray to add brighter hair. And back to the light gray. Putting a few curvy, curly hairs. When I do that, I use the corner of the pastel stick to add those little curls. As you can see here, I'm just drawing them in with the corner of the stick. It works just beautifully. And now I'm adding a few with my white charcoal pencil. Now I've switched to the buff color, 276, to add more creamy colored hairs. I like to have a variety of colors when I paint. I'm using the brown, the cocoa brown again, to color just lightly over the tops of those hair. This pushes the hair underneath the chin back and helps to pull Oscar's muzzle forward. Now this is Cordovan. I'm darkening this. This is really the shadow side of Oscar's face. So I'm darkening this side with a Cordovan where it turns into the shadows. Now here I'm using the black to pick out parts of where that scarf pokes in and out of his fur. It's mostly hidden in that area. There's just a little bit there. And a few black hairs in his eyes. little bit of black down there where the bandana is. And I'm adding the little white checks that are part of the bandana. So I added the black checks and now I'm adding the little white ones. I'm using the 31 Conte pencil to darken the area just below Oscar's bandana. We're going to add fur on top of that, but I think it needs to be a little bit darker. So I'm using the pastel pencil. It does a nice job of darkening things without depositing too much pastel on the paper. I'm going to use the black to darken it a little further, just a very light glaze of black NuPastel. I'm going to use that as well up under Oscar's muzzle, under his chin, just a little. I could use that, and the lighter colors we put in earlier will still show through. So I'm just darkening things before I add some more fur to Oscar. So now I'm going to use my gray pastel stick and I'm going to pull down the fur over the bandana, the small part that we just colored. These hairs are longer. They're really pretty hairs, so I'm taking my time, making them very sharp and drawing them across. Wasn't that nice? I love the way that looks. And now I'm going to use my white NuPastel and make the hairs just a little bit brighter in areas, not all over. Now I'm going to add a little more blue to the background close to Oscar's body, and I'm using the 5085 Prussian blue to add that blue in before I add hair on his left side out into the background. And I'm covering that with the 727.3 blue-gray and a little bit of 700.5 black, all in Rembrandt. And now I'm going to use my light gray pastel stick and start adding hair, pulling hair out into the background from Oscar's chest. I use a variety of colors here. Our 203 burnt sienna, 276 buff, and continue adding hair. I'm going to speed this up a little bit, and you can watch me add the hair. And now I've moved over to the right side of Oscar's face with the 276 buff, adding light hairs to this side of his face. You might wonder, I use a lot of the buff, the 299 light gray, and also the white. So I buy those in large quantities, so I always have those on hand. Now I'm using my 6B charcoal pencil to add Oscar's whiskers. Pulling those out. Just once and done. Just don't be afraid. Get in there, use a very sharp pencil, and pull out those hairs. We're finishing the whiskers on Oscar, and we've come to a close on part 4. Join me for part 5.